Alan Klein is the world's only jollytologist, and we'll find out what that means in just a minute. He shows people worldwide how to use humor and positivity to deal with life's not so funny stuff. He's an award-winning professional speaker, a TEDx presenter, and best-selling author of 3 books, Embracing Life After Loss, You Can't Ruin My Day, and The Healing Power of Humor. He's also the recipient of Toastmasters Communication and Leadership Award and the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor's Lifetime Achievement Award. Those are quite a lineup of very prestigious awards, Alan. He's speaking about humor always been a part of your life? Did public speaking come naturally for you?
Great questions, Nancy, and the answer is no.
Okay.
I was a very, very shy, very serious child. And it actually probably, oh, and I hated to raise my hand in class. So I was uh, not one to share information in class or, become a speaker. I never thought I'd become a speaker. And then,
Okay.
yeah, and then a major, well, I got married and my wife and I laughed a lot. And she kind of got me out of my shell, and I became a little more open and more joyous. And then after 3 years, we found out she had a terminal liver disease,
Mm,
primary biliary cirrhosis. And at that time, there was no cure, there was no liver transplant. And she did pass away 3 years after we found out she had that fatal disease. But we are, even during that difficult time, there were lots of tears. But what stood out for me was one moment of humor when she was in the hospital. And she had a copy of Playgirl magazine with the male nude centerfold. And she said, Alan, I really like this male nude man. Can you put it on the wall by the bed over there? And I said, Ellen, this is a hospital. This is a little risque for that. She said, well, maybe you're right. She said, why don't you get a leaf from the plant and cover up that part? And Nancy, I did that, and things are fine for the first day, fine for the second day. But the third day, the leaves start shriveling up, revealing what we were trying to conceal, and we would start to laugh. And I
even
realized after she died, it wasn't a lot of laughter. It was only 5 or 10, 20 seconds, but it helped us rise above the situation.
mhm.
It gave us a little reprieve, gave us a different perspective. And so after Ellen died, I remember that moment and I went back to school first to learn about death and dying, and then later on to get a master's degree. And my thesis was the healing power of humor. I studied, I was kind of a pioneer, I guess, in the field and studied how therapeutic humor could help us rise above any situation, even just momentarily. So,
That's really an amazing story and a journey that her illness and death took you into that you probably would never have dreamed without that experience. I was
right.
astounded to read that you began volunteering at a hospice center sometime during the first year after your wife's death. What prompted you to do that?
Well, it was a year. Actually, you had to have a loved one a year time before you could volunteer. And it was one of the first hospices with San Francisco Hospice. Hospice was not very well known at that time. There are only a few in the country.
Hmm.
More were happening. And to tell you, funny story about how little it was known. So the hospice I was volunteer with sent out people to talk to groups about the work they did. And a nurse came back and she said, I was speaking for about 5 minutes, and this woman raises her hand in the audience furiously and said, wait a minute, you're talking about death and dying. She said, yeah, that's what hospice deals with. And the woman said, I thought you were going to be talking about hot spice. And so it was fairly new. Why did I volunteer? I don't really know. It was just something. I gave up a business I had. I tried to learn more about death and dying, and that was, I guess, one of the reasons I volunteered. And I wanted to find out other people's experience. I had my own experience. I had somehow worked through it, although you never really get over a loss, I think. But I was at a place where I thought I could help other people, since when I was going through my loss during the 3 years, I did have other people help me, uh,
Yes.
except for one therapist I paid. I don't remember, $45 an hour at that time, it's many years ago. And after the third session, he said, well, Alan, life is tough. And I thought I did not have to pay him that amount of money every week to tell me life is tough. I'm going through that. And so I walked out of the office.
Yes.
But there were some volunteer organizations, like one called Shanti, that had people to volunteer to help other people who were going through the loss. And I met a wonderful woman there, and we really bonded, and she helped me. And I thought, I could help other people. And so I think that was the impetus for becoming a volunteer at hospice.
After you volunteered at hospice, was that when you went back to school and got your master's degree?
Yes, because I noticed how humor would help people in challenging situations. When I was volunteer at hospice, I would notice how sometimes the patient would use sarcastic, cynical humor,
Yeah.
but sometimes it was the only thing that kind of helped them through the day.
Yeah.
And so I thought, no one, I looked up research, nobody was talking about humor in death, dying, and grief situations.
Yeah.
I remember I found one article that was supposed to be in the New York Times. I sat for many days going through a whole year of microfiche. Remember microfiche?
Gosh.
Where you put in a film and you turn the knob. I mean, now I could look this up on the internet and get 30,000 responses. But then, so I looked for, and then I never found the article. So I found out who wrote the article, some professor in Texas. I wrote him and he said it was supposed to be in the New York Times, and they had some major news story that day and they cut it. And he sent me their article. But that's how little there was about humor, therapeutic humor in death and loss. And yeah,
It's such a relief to just meet someone who's willing to talk about death and dying. So many people just avoid the subject, or they're embarrassed, or I've had some major losses also, and people don't want to talk about it, or they don't know what to say. And I just appreciate your willingness to dive deep into the topic and add that element of humor.
yeah, particularly in those days, people did not want to talk about it. It's why they didn't know about hospice.
Yes.
It's a little different. There are something called death cafes where people come together to talk about that.
Uh-huh.
Alternate funerals that I've read about in certain parts of the country. So I think it's a lot more open, and people now know what hospice is. Last I looked, there were over 2,000 hospices around the country.
One,
So
one of my sisters, who's a licensed therapist, worked for hospice in San Diego for several years. And now it's fairly common to be able to find a grief support group. But back in the day, as you said, it was just ignored or treated as a taboo subject.
Yeah, yeah. But I had some, as a volunteer, I had some great experiences, and I would notice how patients, as I said, would use humor. Often the family would not. They were like felt guilty. Uh,
Mhm.
and my thinking was, this is probably one of the most stressful times in your life. And if you could find some humor, I know it's difficult, but if you can find some humor, um, it helps with the stress. And
Yes,
so, like, my thing was death and humor. It's very important to look for the humor,
yeah,
and laughter and tears are very close too. Sometimes you're laughing and crying at the same time, or
yeah.
at a funeral, people think you're crying when you're actually laughing a lot, or vice versa. Um, and so I felt it was very important to get that message out, um, particularly since my wife and I had laughed together a
Yeah.
lot together before she became ill, and even during that long 3 years of the terminal illness.
So your humor isn't an attempt to bypass the tears or the grieving. You're not trying to laugh instead of crying, it's laughing along with. Is that
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and also to alleviate the thought that, oh, my loved one, is gone. How could I laugh at a time like this? And my thinking is it's very helpful. And your loved one probably would feel honored if you did, because I interviewed a number of people for my book, and I asked them, how would you want your loved one to um, be remembered? And, what would you want to remember from that experience with your loved one? And most 90% of the people said they'd want my loved one to remember the joyous, fun times, the laughs we had together.
yes?
And yet, a lot of people don't do that. So I thought I had to get that message out too.
I'm so glad you pointed that out because it's easy to feel, or maybe the instinct is to feel guilty for being happy after such a great loss. And yet, happiness is exactly what our loved ones want for us.
Right,
I
right.
love this statement that I'm going to quote from your article. To want what I didn't have was to waste what I did have. What are some things that you still had after your wife Ellen's passing?
Well, I realized that yes, loved one in my life was gone. Someone really significant in my life was gone, but I still had a daughter. She was 10 years old when my wife died. I still had a house that Ellen and I had bought together, a Victorian house that we always wanted. So I still had that. I had a really good job. I had friends around that supported me. I lived in a great city. I had food on the table. I mean, there was just so much to be grateful for. And, so I had one thing that brought me grief and that was not a happy place, but I had so much more that I could focus on. And even my daughter, after Ellen died, I said, we because it was very difficult for her too, losing her mom when she was 10 years old. And so I said, Sarah, we need an adventure. We need, after all we've been through. And so this was just a gut feeling, Nancy. It wasn't like anything I read about. It was just like, and so what I did is I booked a trip to Alaska, and we were on small boats near glaciers. We slept overnight near a glacier, and
Oh, wow.
we saw puffins that we still talk about. My daughter is 57, which I can't believe, And we still talk about those puffins that we saw on
Yeah.
that trip. Um, we saw waterfalls. We were on the Inside Passage, and it was just like, and it helped us bond,
Yes.
father and daughter. And so it was a wonderful thing, and brought us so much joy after all the sadness.
What a wonderful way to remind each other of all the beauty there is in the world, as well as there, of course, is pain. There are
Right.
times things that are very tough. I believe that every trauma brings hidden gifts if we're willing to receive them. What are one or two of the gifts that came out of this great loss for you?
Well, I think the greatest gift, I mean, I never thought that I would be a professional speaker to talk about therapeutic humor because I almost failed speech in college. I
Ah,
hated to get up in front of a group. And here I was as a professional speaker speaking. I mean, I have spoken to 1,500 people in the Grand Ole Opry Auditorium. And,
ah,
you know, I was scared stiff. I was like, but my message that I had to get this message out helped me overcome my fear of speaking. And I kept thinking of people like Lily Tomlin that I had seen rehearsing her show for Broadway and stop and go, excuse me, I don't like the way this is coming out. I'm going to do it over again. Or Barbara Streisand, who never recorded, who never, not a recording, but who never did a live show for 20 years because
yes,
she was afraid. She did recordings, because she could stop and do it over and over, but she
yes.
can't really do that too much in a live show. And so I thought of those famous people. And I thought, well, if they could be afraid or comfortable to be on stage and admit that they're not doing well, or that I could just go out there and speak about my experience. And if I concentrated on my material, I got through my fear and became an award-winning professional speaker.
So
So
the message was more important than your fear.
yeah. So I guess that's the greatest gift, you
Uh-huh.
know, and now that's turned into more, yes, therapeutic humor, but that's all part of positive psychology. So I also talk about positivity
Hmm.
and changing our attitude, that our attitude is so important and how we can change it in any situation.
We can switch from negative to positive in an instant, can't we?
Yeah. And I point out Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning. He was in a concentration camp
Right.
and he talks about changing his attitude and actually finding a little bit of humor every day, joking about the crumb of bread that they got, or some guard in the guard over there, or um, finding something positive,
Mhm.
changing your attitude. He said that was the only power we had really in life, was our attitude.
Yes.
And so all that fits with humor and positive attitudes and positivity.
How did you come up with your title, the Jolly Tologist? You call
Paleontologist.
Yeah.
Well, when I was researching humor and getting my master's degree, I found out that laughter in Greek was gelos.
Oh,
Gelos. So I started to call myself a gelotologist, but
uh-huh.
in writing it was Gelos, but when people heard it, they thought I made that wiggly dessert.
Yeah, yes.
So I changed it to jollytologist. Um, and looking back, I thought, well, maybe it should have been jollyologist, but I don't know. I don't
Well,
know why I put the T in, but I
even even that word brings a smile to my face, Jolly Tologist.
glad
For
you say that. Yeah, because when I tell people I'm a jollytologist, one, they smile right away, and two, it's what is that?
Yeah. For the viewers of this video, I recommend that you read the full article in Authority magazine titled Strategies for Rebuilding Life After Trauma by Alan Klein. And for more information, you can go to his website, Alan Klein, that's ALLENKLEIN.com. Alan, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me this morning. I really appreciate getting to meet you.
Nancy, this has been great. Thank you for interviewing me for the article and for this person to person on Zoom interview. I loved it.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I just love your work. I love your attitude, and I appreciate all the ways that you are helping others.
All right. Well, thank you. And I didn't put this on, did I?
No, you
A very simple way to get more laughter in your life is get a red clown nose and put it on and look in the mirror.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us too.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
I'm having a little trouble here with my, there it is. Okay.
Are we good?